All right, so welcome to the Troy Kearns Channel podcast, where we talk all things real estate, business, entrepreneurship. Today, I'm with one of the best attorneys in all of Las Vegas, with one of the best firms, Joseph Ganley from Hutchison and Steffen. Joe, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Troy. Thanks for having me. Glad to see you again. It's been a little bit. Well, I'm an attorney here in Las Vegas and came from Boston, and you'll be able to tell that soon, I'm sure, with my accent that I haven't shaken after all these years. Yeah, I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for 27 years. Got educated back east. Ended up in Las Vegas. I have a classic Vegas story, how I ended up here like everyone else.
How did you get here again?
You know, I got a job at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the summer.
Okay.
For the summer during one of my law school years. When I got out here, my boss was a Boston Irishman. Moynihan was his last name, and he was the chief of the civil division in the U.S. Attorney's Office. We hit it off. At the time, I was coming from Boston University. At the time, there was a kid from Harvard here named Clarity.
Okay.
So we had a good summer. We hung out, and they called us the Irish Musketeers, and I just had a great time. You know, we were working on organized crime task force, a drug task force.
So you were going for the like the political thing. You're going after guys.
Yeah. It was heady stuff. Now, I was just a law student.
Yeah.
But it was a good job to get. I was glad to have it. It was a great experience. And Moynihan, my old boss, pushed Las Vegas on me, and he kept saying, "You coming to Vegas?" I'm like, there's not a snowball's chance in heck I am gonna end up in freaking Vegas. No way.
Yeah.
And
what happened?
You know what happened? So I go back to BU, and I got 2 more years left to BU, and we stayed in touch. And third year BU, he says, "Ganley, get out here, and I want you to come out here and interview." I said, "No way." He said, "All right, I'll tell you what. Just come out for your spring break. Clarity's coming back out here from the Justice Department, and we'll have a good week together." So I said, "Yeah, all right, I'll come visit you and Clarity, Kevin Clarity." And before I got on the plane, he's like, "Hey, bring a suit." He goes, "I lined up some interviews." I'm like, "Mother, you son of a gun." So
he
I
closed
did.
you.
Yeah, so I did. I came out and I went through these interviews here in Vegas with some big firms in town, and I did it really to appease him.
Right.
And he had his own agenda going, and now in hindsight, I mean, that was such a blessing in disguise, and I'm so grateful because that's where I met Mark Hutchison, and you know Mark well.
Right. Not as well as you. You're like his right hand man, right?
Yeah, I mean John Steffen and me. Yeah, I'd say, and I met Mark Hutchison on that interview when I was out here, and I'm flying back to Boston, Troy. Here I am finishing up law school in Boston. I got a job lined up in Boston in the Federal Reserve building, which was a big heady thing at that time.
Your career was going a different way.
Yeah, totally different way, and
Right.
it was good heady stuff, and I met Hutchison,
Right.
And flying back on the plane, I thought, man, if Hutchison ever offered me a job. Now, at that time, it wasn't Hutchison and Steffen. He was at a bigger firm, which was a spinoff of Lionel Sawyer and Collins. And flying back on the plane, I thought, man, if he ever offers me a job, I'd have to really, really think of that.
Really?
And then, how life happens.
what
It's
it-
never planned. Then he offered the job.
Well, what impressed you so much about him? Like, so for those of you guys who don't know, who's Mark Hutchison?
So Hutchison is my law partner. He is the former lieutenant governor of the state of Nevada. I think he'd be the governor of the state of Nevada right now if he ran in the last election against Sisolak. He chose not to. A lot of people wanted him to run, even Democrats. So the thing about Mark politically is he appeals to conservative Democrats. So he can grab that vote. But he's still a tried and true Republican. So, but he has this personal appeal to people, and he's charismatic, he's smart, he's energetic, he's got a lot of things that are good for Nevada. And
Why didn't he run?
I think part of the reason why he didn't run, Troy, was because that's definitely a question for him, and he could answer that way better than I. But I personally think, without any insight from Mark, is that the firm is flourishing. Mm-hmm. He's busy with law practice. He's busy with his family. He's active in his church. So he had all those things going for him. And I think he thought maybe the next election round he'll do it. And now what's happening is Hutchison has formed a political action committee that supports Republican candidates. So, but he was that charismatic for me way back then to give me the impetus, or at least the notion that
you guys have fire, both of you guys. When I met you guys very young in my career on suing a former partner that screwed me, and you were just a dynamite guy and still are. And I was like, I need to these guys. And somebody told me, they're like, hey, watch your bill.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And I was like, well, they're really good, and you guys are, and that's why people pay for you.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing about, listen, Troy, I'll be the first one to say, the lawyer fees are obnoxious.
Right.
The rates we charge, it's obnoxious. I can't afford myself sometimes. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I don't come from a long line of attorneys. I come from my dad was a bricklayer, and I didn't know any attorneys, and so I get it because I know the value of a buck. But anytime we needed to talk about a bill or rates and all that stuff, I'd talk to you about it. We'd work it out and figure out what was fair.
I mean, that's why we ended up bringing you on the HOA board and stuff like that. Like when I feel like if you guys ever want the best attorney, like when you then that's why you look at attorneys. You're like, okay, there's some guys that you got to bring in, and you want a flamethrower.
Yeah,
bring in Joe Ganley.
Yeah. Well, thanks. And I got to tell you, Hutchison, as you know, is just like that.
Yes,
100%. Super energetic. And you said, so what was it about Hutchison way back then? That was it. Listen, I had worked in New York City. At a huge international law firm called Davis Polk & Woodwell. They're down on Wall Street. And then I had worked at these big firms in Boston. This was a big firm in Nevada, but it was completely different. Like there was no ego. There was no he was just very, very approachable, very down to earth, but super smart too.
Super smart, he's a fighter.
Fighter,
right?
Yep.
You guys fight together. You guys have done some big cases. What's like one of the big cases that you guys have done that you could talk about? Where you won? I know you've gone against like some Goliaths, right?
Yeah. So no, thanks for asking, Troy. I'll tell you what just happened 2 months ago was one of the biggest cases of our career, and Hutchison was the lead, and that was an antitrust case. So anything we talk about, as you know, Troy, is public knowledge, right?
Right.
So anything else we couldn't talk about, but this case, our client was Switch.
Okay.
So publicly traded, they're a big dog. Switch is a great Nevada-born story. I mean, that guy started here. He started small.
Is that Gregson?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just an incredible story. Built that thing up, and it's done a phenomenal job. And it was an antitrust case. So that was another company saying, hey, you put us out of business because you're a monopoly, and you have total control. And that was a massive case. It was going to be, they were seeking $500 million in damages or more once you get it in triplicate. So it ended up resolving after 3 days of trial. And we had the judge had slated 5 to 6 weeks of trial.
How are your nerves in trial? Like the first time, it's intense in there. Like the first time I got deposed, I think it was with you. You actually put me in with the I'll give you one thing. So you were right about Alaska Airlines.
Oh, yeah.
Joe gives me the best advice a lawyer can give you, which is take your battle elsewhere, Troy. You're a smart guy. Don't make a stupid case and sue a company that can burn their cargo and get away with it.
Yeah.
I had gotten kicked off an Alaska Airlines flight for doing nothing, which was simply speaking back to the stewardess when she asked me a question, and so
very unfairly, I got to say, it truly was. Sorry to interrupt you, Troy.
No, go ahead, you're fine.
Truly was unfair. I saw the videotape. Troy was coming to the aid of another passenger who had been being berated and mistreated by the stewardess. And you stepped up and said, hey, hold on, you leave this lady alone. And then the next thing, you were the target.
Right.
And, man, I felt really bad for you.
That's essentially it. And, we ended up going to battle. And then I probably should have took the first deal on the table. And you always learn your lessons on those ones. You actually teed it up for me pretty nicely. And I actually ended up spilling the beans on that one and costing myself more than what I already could have gotten on the first one. So I should have settled that deal when you put me in front of the person there, but I didn't. I wanted more, and
that's all right though. You know what, Troy? I never faulted you for that. I always say attorneys make recommendations, clients make decisions. So we made the recommendation,
right.
And but I also understood where you were coming from, because those are the toughest, right? Where you truly were mistreated. And not treated right. And it was a decent deal, but it wasn't a blockbuster deal. And you're an ambitious guy, right? So,
Well, I needed more horsepower. If I was going to fight that fight, I needed that to be my only fight.
Yes.
And spend a lot of money on it.
Yeah.
And I should have had more evidence, and I should have let him drag me out. And you know what? Honestly, that was just my ego was wounded on that one, probably, right? Your ego's...
It happens, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you as a wise attorney says, hey...
Well, without breaching any privileges or saying what I told Troy at the time, I will say here's the way I look at Troy. This guy, it's going to sound hokey over there, he's soaring with the Eagles. And so sometimes you don't want to swat at the flies. And, that Alaska Airlines thing, I'm like, you know what, this is kind of swatting at flies right now. And what you're doing with your life, as much as you can try to put that behind you, you don't want to swat at the flies. Sometimes the tough thing, though, is somebody's going to win or get the better of you if you just leave them behind. But in the macro level view, right, you're going to be better off. You got them in your rearview mirror. I'm mixing metaphors here, but they're behind you. They can feel like they beat you or defeated you. You're like, whatever. Right. You're above that. You're like, yeah, go have your party, rejoice, do your Irish.
If you're like, so most of the guys who are listening to the show or gals who are listening to the show, they're either thinking about getting into real estate investing, business, entrepreneurship, and do you ever see people get sued in real estate, business, entrepreneurship?
All the time. Yeah,
okay.
All the time. Yeah.
What's the most common reason that you have disputes?
Well, one thing, just like you said, like the first time we met, you're having a dispute with your partner, and we handle that all the time, right. Whether it's in real estate, whatever business it is, we handle that all the time. And I call those, Troy, corporate divorces.
Right.
And they're a lot like divorces. They carry the emotion of divorces, sure. the animosity, the recriminations and all that stuff. And the thing about it is,
I can remember it.
Yeah, you're
like, you did that to me.
Yeah,
you know
right.
I mean?
Yeah,
right.
And you can't. Sometimes you can't let it go, and it even dovetails a little with that Alaska Airlines case. Like those things are so emotional. Divorces are so emotional. And corporate divorces are. We've done some where folks have been partners for 40 years. Wow. They're godparents to each other's kids. They've gone on vacations together, and and then they're at each other's throats, and it's tough, and it's so we got to do when those happen. I always tell the associates, I say, being a counselor at law is a lot tougher and more important than being an attorney at law.
Right.
And you've probably heard that expression once or twice, but
I haven't. That's the first time.
Yeah, but it's the truth. When you're a counselor at law, so you got to counsel people through these emotional, these traumatic. This turmoil and traumatic times, and that's the toughest part. But to get to your original question, like what causes these disputes, it's usually one of three things. One is greed.
Okay.
People want more of the pie than they deserve. Two is unappreciation for what the other person's doing.
Okay. So what would you call that? Envy?
A little bit envy, or a little bit like just like in a marriage, like envy, like or resentment too.
Resentment.
Usually we'll have in these deals, whether it's real estate or not, there's somebody with money and someone with an idea. So the person with the idea says, hey, I'm more important. I had the idea. I created the whole thing. Yeah. And the person with the money says, you aren't getting anywhere without me.
Yeah.
And they say,
lack of respect for both of their roles.
Exactly.
Right.
And at first, at the outset, it's a honeymoon, right?
Right.
Yeah, they love each other. They both appreciate each other. And then, and that changes over time. And it's just human nature. And
because idea guy is not hard work guy and money guy. Idea guy is idea guy.
He's the idea
guy. He's
guy.
not changing.
No.
And neither is money guy, and they both need to understand that.
That's right.
When you go through a couple of those situations, like even with the past case that we talked about, I think the biggest thing from going through any sort of litigation or even like disputes is that you realize how you're going to do it next time better.
Yeah.
And if that's the only takeaway, like stuff's going to happen, man. Emotions get tied up. Somebody's going to feel some sort of way about you. You're going to feel some sort of way about somebody else. And you need to have a good attorney who's your counselor, who's going to give you good advice. I mean, listen, Joe could have taken a lot more money from me because I wanted to fight. That's what I'm used to doing. You fight when someone takes advantage of you.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you fight with an attorney, it costs a lot of money, and even if you're right, it still costs a lot of money, and you don't get nothing for it.
Yeah. That's right. So sometimes, Hutchison, I will say to clients when they come in, we say, listen, if you want this third-party, overworked, disinterested person, that is the judge, to decide your fate, come to go to the Nevada court system. And that's not denigrating these judges. They work hard, but they're inundated.
It's true. It's true.
It's true. It's just like all our civil servants, right? We're as a city, Nevada Las Vegas has just been growing so much, so fast.
People.
Yeah, and all those stats about the real estate and how it impacts real estate, but it impacts the court system and the civil servants. So the point is they're inundated. and they're overworked, and they work really, really hard, and they try to do a good job. But at the end of the day, they're overworked. They got a million other cases. Each of those judges has like 2,000 cases on their docket. 2,000 cases. So sometimes I'll talk to clients and like, well, the judge will remember us from last time. I'm like, no, it was just 2 weeks ago. I'm like, absolutely will not remember us.
Let me brief him.
Yeah, we got to brief them and remind them because they just have so many cases. And we're litigators and we're fighter pilots. You know that. But we also say, listen, look for alternative.
Look at Joe's vernacular. I love it.
Well,
he's got the Boston, the sports, the fighter pilots.
Mixing it all in.
Yeah.
You know? But I mean, if to avoid those type of disputes, we'll say, yeah, let's try to do something alternative, like maybe a mediation, maybe like with that Alaska airline, we got you in the room. That guy flew down. This guy, they respected that claim so much by Troy that they, because this thing was videotaped, this incident on the Alaska Airlines, and at the time, those type of incidences were making the news a lot.
Right after United.
Yeah, and that some guy got carried off, and he's all bloodied, and then we get this Troy one where he was being mistreated, and so they were concerned about that, and they flew a guy all the way down from Alaska, I think from Alaska, wherever the headquarters are. Seattle.
Right.
Yep, Seattle. That's right, Seattle. All right, so not as far, but they came down and we got them in a room, and that was the whole idea, right? To try to have us work it out together before we put it in the hands of this third party who might not have the time to pay attention to it. But going back to your very original question, Troy, is what can people do in real estate as you guys are starting out? Maybe you're starting a partnership. Maybe you're just starting your own gig. Maybe you're getting certain licenses. But whenever you team up with somebody, well, whenever you start a corporation, the shortest money you can ever spend on an attorney is to get those corporate papers in order. And it's short money. And what I mean by that, it can be $750 to $1,500. More complicated could be $3,000. But that is the shortest money you'll ever spend to get. And here's what you get. You're going to get, if you get a sophisticated attorney who knows how to do that well, you're going to get everything in order, so you don't have to understand all these corporate formalities and how that works. They've done that for you. Now, you can get an education along the way for what you pay, but at least it's in order. And then if anything ever goes south, you can look at the attorney. You know what I mean? You can say, hey, attorney, these things have better be in order because now we have a dispute and we have to go rely on these papers, these incorporation papers. That's the article. That's the
operating agreement.
Operating agreement, and so if you have an attorney who has done that, you can also fall back on they're responsible for it, and not you. You know, we have so many, Troy, where people come to us, sophisticated people who have been in business for a long time.
Right.
They come with papers that they created themselves. And, there's inevitably like big voids or omissions.
Well, because you guys write the law.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
A contract's different, but how it's applied, right?
Yeah.
Based is on what? NAC, right? Versus NRS and all of that jazz. So let's go through that. Like, NAC means how the law is applied, right?
Yep.
If somebody's talking about the law, they might be, well, that's NRS. And you're like, well, that's NAC. And you're like, what the hell is that? That's why you need an attorney, because you interpret how the law is applied.
Yeah, exactly. And the courts ultimately do, but then we persuade the courts why they should be decided that way.
Well, you decide what you're going to present.
Yes.
And then they make the determination, right?
Yeah, that's
so
right.
You're presenting the evidence.
Yeah, and the thing is to have these incorporated, just to have these things, all your ducks in a row there, because you know how much litigation costs. And I'm a litigator, so I don't, all the stuff I just described, the transactional, we call that transactional law, corporate transactional law, that side of it, I don't do. Those
Joe's not doing your LLC paperwork.
Yeah, we have people who do. We have a whole department that does it. Those folks in that department, they're always like, I could never be a litigator. You guys you're up all night long, and it's so much tension and adversary. Because when you put incorporation papers together, there's nothing really adversarial about it. It's all kumbaya. Yeah. Everyone's happy. It's like a marriage, So. Yeah.
Then you're fighting over words later.
Yeah, but as a litigator, I always look at their type of practice. I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't want to be the guy who left out the critical clause, right? The critical provision, because we're the litigators. We look at these things like, where the heck is that friggin' clause? Who wrote these things? And and then we chase that guy down. We're like, what the heck were you thinking? So I don't want to be that guy, but like you said, they have a lot of it's formulaic. They have a lot of forms, and then it evolves. The law's always evolving, so you're always doing little changes to contracts as you go forward, as you learn stuff from litigation. I'll give you a good example. When the collapse happened, the real estate collapse, Was that 2008?
2012 was the lowest point.
2012 was the lowest point.
Lowest point, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, all of those, the Cosmo and City Center, and they all had these condos they were selling.
Blue.
Yeah, look at that. You know, and just
Carl Icahn flipped that for $500 million.
there you go. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that guy's what a genius. But you know, from that, all those condos that they sold, you know, they were selling those things for like millions of dollars at the top level, you know, at the penthouse level. And then when the market collapsed, they went down to like 1/5 or 1/6 of their value, and everybody was bailing, right?
Right.
And then even the Cosmo, they didn't have those weren't as ironclad as they thought they were. So the litigation. So listen, they prevailed because they had financial muscles and they could muscle those folks. But really, what the point of mentioning that whole thing is, then from that they learned a lesson and they shored up those contracts going forward to account for a major recession like that. I mean, they call it the Great Recession, but I mean, it's almost a depression.
Who's the toughest, like, I've watched a bunch of depositions. I'm interested in the law. I think, you know, I'm trying to raise 2 attorneys.
Yeah.
I got 2, 28 years olds. I'm like, what are you going to do? Where do you go? Law school, Dad, law school. You know, just understand the law. Dad wants you to be litigators. That's what I'm hoping on. That's why my wife always says, you could put me in a room with a full of attorneys and I'm like in heaven.
Yeah.
You know, like get a bunch
Well,
of...
I told you probably don't remember the first time I met you. I'm like, you could be an attorney. Because you had all these ideas, and you're like, "Hey, I want to do this."
It's one of my big regrets, not going to, like, just figuring it out too late in my. You know, I could always go back, but I'm too far. You know, I'm too far gone now.
I think I asked you in that meeting if you had been to law school. You had, because sometimes we have that, right? They don't practice, but they've been to law school. You had some training. You're like, no. And I'm like, well, intuitively, you have a lot of good legal thoughts and strategic thoughts. And I still remember our first meeting too, however long ago that was. But
it's like almost 15 years ago. So it's a long time.
Years,
Yeah. Time flies. So have you ever fought like Sheldon Adelson? Because I've watched his depositions, and this guy, I mean, you want to talk about horsepower.
Yeah.
And he likes to fight.
He likes to fight. Yeah. So
rest in peace, obviously.
Yeah. Amen. So we've been on both sides of Sheldon, and so we represented him.
Okay.
Now I didn't personally meet him. Well, I didn't meet him in a legal setting. I met him elsewhere. But yes, but. So we've sued him because when the whole thing went down, we represented we represented the biggest sheetrock company out of California, the biggest in the world. And you know, they put all that sheetrock in there. We
what happened there? Can we talk about that at all?
Yeah, I can tell you. We get out early.
I never knew about this whole thing. This is where Sheldon supposedly stiffed people.
Yeah.
Okay.
So listen, I don't.
On the Venetian.
On the Venetian. So when you say stiff people, what Troy's talking about is all the subcontractors and contractors, and he made claims of inferior workmanship and all that stuff. Even though the thing is the thing is palatial and beautiful and spectacular, you know. So on the one hand, here's Sheldon, who's a genius from Boston, by the way. He has that Boston
Dorchester.
Yeah, from Dorchester. Used to drive a cab back there.
That's right.
His story is incredible. But so. A lot of people would say, hey, we got stiffed and, you know, they can't stand him for that reason. We had a huge player in that, and we get out early. And I have to tell you, I can tell you, we staked a little bit of our relationship with this client. They're the largest sheetrock manufacturer in the world, and they also install it too. So we staked it because we made a recommendation to get out early for I can't tell you what the percentage was, but
less. Take less, get out now.
Take less, get out now. And in the end, it turned out to be a king's ransom. Like we got out so early because we kind of knew about Sheldon. We saw where this was going. We thought, you know what, this is going to go for a long time. It's going to cost you more money, even though you owed a big chunk of change. It's going to cost more in fees than you'll ever recover. That was our feeling. They went with the recommendation, holding their nose. They weren't too happy about it until a year or two later. Then they were like, hallelujah, thank you.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
And we were like, man, that worked out. But that thing went on for 5 years.
Yeah.
And
get out early. That's the name.
When
of the
you're
game.
going against a titan like that, and understanding,
or somebody's trying to steal your money.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, either way, not like if you got somebody who's like the market's going down, they're in the power seat, they got your money. If there's a bunch of investors, like I had a situation, I'm like, let's go after the guy. I didn't hire an attorney, but we went after the guy, and we got out. And now I told everybody, let's get out together. And they're like, no, we're in. I got out. They're still all in.
Yeah.
They want out.
And they want out now. And,
Right.
and so that's it. So you have to sort of understand who you're going against. Right. Sheldon's a good example because Sheldon was notoriously adversarial and combative, right? He was not, and he had the money, right? So I'm going to be the first person to tell you that, yes, our system is flawed in the sense if you have money, you certainly can do better in the system, and it needs to be corrected, but it's the way it is right now in certain respects, not all respects, but certain respects. And a guy like Sheldon Adelson, he had the funds, he could hire the best lawyers in the world, and he did, and I call it flexing the financial muscles. So he would do that because he would go.
What can somebody like him do to stop things and just cause all sorts of problems?
The whole purpose of some of these rules of procedure are to create fairness, right? But they can also be exploited to cause delay. And time was always on his time if he's got the money, because you could never bleed him to death. Never.
Right.
I mean, he was unlimited funds. And so that's what I mean. He'd flex his financial muscles. Here, some of these small subcontractors were hanging on for dear life. A lot of them lost their attorneys because they couldn't pay them anymore. Right. Some attorneys hung on, honorable ones hung on there and just did a pro bono going forward. And that's the only way those small subs could have. You can imagine, Troy, like getting a gig like that. You're like, if you have a mom and pop business, you come home and like, hey, mom, hey, we got the Venetian. Yeah, we're going to be working at the Venetian with the big dogs. And then ultimately it causes your demise. And so that part, and that did happen to some folks, and that was sad. And some people would demonize Sheldon for that. I don't necessarily know all those facts on that stuff. Right. We did represent the Venetian at certain points. Listen, they have so many attorneys. We're just one of many, but for a little bit. And so, we're on both sides of that stuff.
So, Joe, like, you're a huge sports fan. You're a competitive guy. You went to the game last week. I've called you a number of times. I'm like, where you at? You're like, I'm at the Patriots. I'm golfing. Yeah. What are you up to these days?
Yeah, so sports fandom-wise, still a Patriots fan. I know that probably will turn off more than half your audience. I get it, and I don't care. I don't care because the Patriots are winners, all right? My kid,
we're.
But and listen, I lived in New York City too. I get it. I was right in the Lions Den down there when I lived there. Being a Boston sports fan in New York City, that's as tough as it can get. But I love it. Bring it on. Everyone loves their own teams, and my boy. I have a 12-year-old boy. He goes to school and he puts on his Patriots stuff, and he was like 8 at the time. He's like, Dad, people hate the Patriots. I go, I know, boy. And he's like, oh, at that age you can be influenced by that. I'm like, he's gonna dump the Pats. I'm like, hey, Max, anyone gives you crap, you just tell them you're with the winners. You stay over there with the losers. You're over here with the winners because we're going to the Super Bowl every year. So, but things have changed, Troy. I get it. I got to be a little more humble about it. And
Tom Brady's gone.
Tom's
you just went
gone.
to that Super Bowl. You were saying.
Yeah, went down to that Super Bowl, that Tampa Bay Super Bowl.
I thought there was only cardboard there.
Almost, yeah. Yeah.
Just you.
Yeah. You know what? I had 3 cardboards next to me. My buddy, who was a client, now is a friend, and he's actually a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan, moved to Tampa and bought the tickets. He loved football so much, he bought the tickets before Tom committed to Tampa Bay. So you talk about timing and market, and, everything's a market, right?
Right.
Even like sports tickets, as we know, is a market. And so my buddy bought these Tampa Bay Buccaneers tickets. And then they signed Tom Brady like 2 months later, and the value of those tickets like quadrupled like overnight. And he's like, Joe, you can't come to any more games. I'm going to sell the tickets. So I said, all right.
So we're just talking about like sports and legal matters. It gives me a good transition to John Gruden and that whole situation there.
Yeah.
It's clear to me that like that came out of nowhere. Like if they cared about that, there's an email. Who hasn't, it's like the old thing. Who hasn't said something stupid that doesn't have it in writing that you can go point to it? Is it a pattern of behavior? No. Yeah. Anyways.
I agree with you, Troy. So if I may, just on that,
please.
Because I'm a little passionate about that. I've always liked John Gruden. Before he came to the Raiders, I liked him when he was in Tampa Bay. He was with the Raiders before that, but and the Patriots beat him in that snow game. People call it the tuck rule game, but in New England we call it the snow game. But anyways, even then when Gruden was upset and pissed off at the Patriots, I still like the guy because he's all in. This guy is committed.
100%.
He bleeds football, that guy, and you can just feel it.
Chucky.
Chucky. Yeah,
That's
Chucky.
it. Did you ever did you ever watch the show he had, the quarterback show?
Yes, and he had the quarterback
Was
show.
he the best Monday Night Football?
And he did Monday Night Football, so he was good at that stuff. Like, he was good for the league. And then, like Troy was just talking about, and this is why I wanted to jump in, Troy, is, when I read those things, right, it came out, and he wasn't proud of what he said and whatnot. We don't even have to comment on that. But I thought, there but for the grace of God go I, right? There but for the grace of God go anyone. You could look back at anything that you put in writing or said a decade or more ago and have to answer for that now. That's a tough thing. If it's not, like you said, I don't think reflective of him being misogynistic or racist or anything like that. And the players in his team, the black and the African Americans and the minorities on that team backed Gruden. And even the announcers backed Gruden. They said he's not a racist, and we're not going to have him be beholden to these emails that were long ago.
Why do you think they did it?
I think they did it because of Goodell. He criticized Goodell in those emails. I think Goodell is all powerful.
How does Goodell have so much power? How do we get rid of Goodell?
Phenomenal. I don't think we're ever going to get rid of him. And the reason is he deflects so much. He takes. You know how much he gets paid?
$40 million a year, I thought.
$40 million a year.
Right.
That's before he gets bonused.
Right.
$40 million a year.
And it used to be a non-for-profit. Did you know that?
No.
The NFL was a non-for-profit. That's how they were structured.
How did I not know that? Man, I did not know that.
Yeah. Look it up.
Yeah, no, I don't tell you. I don't tell you. Man, that's crazy. Yeah, so he gets paid like $40 million before he gets bonus, and the guy's not spending a dime on anything else, right? So I think because of the criticism that Gruden put in those emails about Goodell, which were, my goodness, he's allowed to speak privately to a friend who was an executive at the Washington Redskins at the time, and that's how they get this. They're doing that investigation on the sexual harassment in the workplace. They got all these emails, and only that tranche of emails is disclosed and made public, and then this guy gets fired. It was just a hatchet job from the beginning. And now Gruden has that lawsuit against the NFL, and God bless him. I hope he wins.
Yeah, I hope he wins too. Goodell, let's talk about him. So you know way more about football than I do. I don't get into the political thing. What does he control? How does the whole system work? Like, do the owners have any rights? It seems like the owners' rights are going away.
I would say they're not.
Okay.
I just say they're getting even more powerful. Listen, they're giving a bigger piece of the pie to the players, right?
Right, and the players should get some money.
Amen. The players should get that, and they should actually probably get more of the piece of pie. But look at the control they have about. Here's the benefit in the luxury that the NFL has over other professional sports leagues, and that is that these players have short careers. I think the average NFL player plays for 3.4 years or something.
It's like I think a running back is like 2.5 years.
2.5 years. Brutal position. Position. Don't have your boys play running back. Have them be an offensive lineman or quarterback. And Tom Brady's clearly the outlier, right? He's screwing up the averages. But because they have such short careers, you can't unionize these people. You can't have these people unified. They're unionized, but you can't have them unified enough to make an impact against the league. So when they're negotiating, the league always has that leverage over them. They say, you guys can't strike because you're going to have all these wildcats, and they're going to be wildcats. They're going to cross the picket line because their career is going to be over.
There's nowhere to go.
That's right. There's nowhere else to go, and their career will be over. If you're a running back and you say, I'm going to take 2 years off in this labor dispute, well, in the meantime, all these other running backs have come through the college system, and it's like a glut, and the competition is so much greater.
Do you remember when Trump tried to start the USFL? Wasn't
I
it?
sure do, yeah.
And
you know why I know a lot about that? Not only was the East Coast, and Trump was still really well known then. I like the idea of. Here's the thing. I love the Patriots. I love football. And I love other teams in the league too.
Right, me too.
The Saints and some others.
Yeah.
And I like the Cardinals, believe it or not, Arizona Cardinals. But anyways, so like the game, I can't stand the NFL. I can't stand the league.
Right. It's just, and you know what? Listen, let's talk about it. If you go take your family to a game, and I'm going to talk to you about, like, if I wasn't in such a good position financially, and a lot of people, they're living paycheck to paycheck. They want to take their kids to games too, and it's not affordable. Like, that's like to go and sit on the 40-yard line at the Raiders game, 8 rows back, cost me $150,000, and then each ticket thereafter is $400 to $500 per ticket. So now if you want to go sit in the nosebleeds and get your binoculars on, you're still looking at a few $100s. It's going to cost you several $1,000s to go take your family to a football game.
Yeah.
And that's because, and especially in places like Las Vegas, and let's talk about this. That was a private-public partnership that is never going to end. That money's not going away. That's still getting paid.
Yeah.
So Raiders win, Vegas wins, fans lose.
We pay for it. Yeah, for sure. Fans pay for it. And the taxpayer, too, even if you're not a fan.
Right. The taxpayers pay for it, and everybody else loses. And really, there should just be a second-tier football team or something that could rival the NFL.
Yeah, amen. So you're preaching the choir on that big time, Troy. And I love football, and there's a lot of players out there who are talented and can't make this league because the rosters are 53 or 58 now. But, so there's a lot of good players who are left by the sidelines. So you could create another league. It just takes a lot of money to do that, and that's been a little bit of the problem.
Is that something you want to work on?
Yeah, right. I'd love that. And then, to build up the fan base and all that stuff. But think about what you just said. You paid $150,000 to the Raiders for the privilege to give them more money.
For the rights to give them more money.
To give them more money.
They got me pot committed.
Yeah, you're committed, right? And so, and that's that's
I'm getting out of that deal.
Okay.
So the guy behind me, he's like, I'll make you whole. And I'm like, I get it. It's emotional, right? I'm like, I get it, I'm like, okay, you make me whole. I don't want to die more than when I'm in it, but I want rights to buy my seats for as long as, and they're non-transferable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can't just sell it to your son and then my rights go away.
Yeah.
Like, as long as you have the tickets, I have access to them. And so he's going to buy them. And then
That's a great deal.
For me, it's a great deal. For him, it's a great deal.
Yeah.
And
that's what we call a win-win.
It is. Well, if he thought it was, if he thought it wasn't a great deal, and I didn't think it was a great deal, but I might not even come to 2 games, but the fact that I could have options to go to 2 seats, 2 games, they're still my seats. I still get that emotional attachment that, like, hey, because my plan was to take my kids there, and what I mean? So, you know how it is.
I do. Yeah, I totally know how it is. And we actually, as a law firm, a lot of the firms in town or the businesses in town support these pro teams now that we're a big league city. And we supported the Knights very strongly right out of the gate, way before the NHL even gave us a franchise. So we were on that. But with the Raiders, I'll tell you. So I was negotiating with the Raiders, right? Just like anybody else, any other person trying to buy a ticket. And, they're trying to sell us on suites. And the suites are sweet, right?
How much were the suites?
They were like, well, I'll tell you this. I don't know per year, but I do know that it was a 30-year commitment. And at the end of that, so when I was going through my negotiations with my rep, my Raiders rep, which we did down at they try to court you and stuff. So they brought me down to the PG event, the Shriners thing, and we're in the tent, and we're doing the negotiations there. And I said, what is the nut? What is the total amount of money we'll have paid you after 30 years? And he said, oh, no one really asked that. I'm like, I need to know. And he's like, $7.5 million. I'm like, $7.5 million. I'm like, I think what we'll do is go buy like a beach house in Southern California, Huntington Beach, and send our clients there. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that kind of dissuaded us from doing the deal.
So I've got season tickets for the Kansas City Chiefs right now, season tickets for the Raiders, season tickets for the Seattle Seahawks.
Look at that. I mean,
season tickets for the Saints.
Wow.
And so I'm done.
But that's how strong the NFL is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I'm done. I'm just going to go buy. I don't need to own those tickets anymore and have that emotional attachment now that I've been bouncing around a little bit. I'm just going to be like, you know what? Okay, cool. I'm coming to Vegas. I love Vegas. I like going to games. Let me go buy some nice tickets that I'm not financially committed for $15,000 for that year. Maybe I'm committed $5,000 for that game.
Yeah, amen. Smart. And I think the deal that you have with the guy behind you at the Allegiant is a good deal. That is a win-win. And then, you get the rights, but you don't have that. You don't have that nut hanging over you, and you have to pay for that. And it's a lot. It's a lot of work to get. So we have I have season tickets to the New England Patriots, and we have.
How much are those tickets?
They're the most expensive in the league, and honestly, and the reason why is and I never ever complain about this because I love the Kraft family who bought the Patriots.
Yeah.
Because the reason why they're so expensive, Troy, is the Patriots didn't do seat licenses. So that big.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they said, we got a blue collar fan base. We're not going to charge them for the right to buy tickets. And we were so grateful. Now, I was already season ticket holder before they bought. We've had season tickets in my family, so I'm not I'm not a front runner on this, folks. My dad had season tickets to the Patriots the very first year they started.
Really?
So, yeah.
What year was that?
1960.
So 1960. So it's a family thing.
It's a family thing. Okay. And Troy, when I was growing up, you couldn't get rid of Patriots tickets. They were $2 a ticket. $2. I couldn't get friends to go. And, one thing about, when you're 10, 11, and 12 and your friend's opinion means everything to you, like, oh, you get that type of sneaker, they stink. And then you're Mom, Dad, I want a new pair of sneakers. I couldn't get friends. They'd say, no, I don't want to go to the Patriots. They stink. I was impervious to that. I was such a real fan.
Your dad had you brainwashed.
Right? Yeah, the Patriots stunk. Everyone knows that. Before this long, well, these young folks might not know it. Before this Tom Brady run, the Patriots stunk. We were laughing stock of the league. I'd go down there when the Patriots are 1-12 and the freezing cold benches, and I'd still go, and I loved it.
I was a Seahawk fan for years and years and years.
Right.
I still am.
I love
but
that.
It's just, when you move away, you still have all your roots back in Boston, right?
Family.
Who's back there right now?
So Catholic family, Irish Catholic family. I got 5 siblings back there.
5 siblings.
And a mom, yep.
So your whole family.
Yeah, they're the beneficiaries. So the tickets are in my name, and they go to all the games. Well, I fly back, as you know, but not when I can. Yeah.
So you're the only one not living in Boston.
Well, I have another sister who just moved down to Charleston, South Carolina.
So are people starting to leave Boston? Boston's gotten crazy too. I've been there lately. That market is unaffordable right now.
Unaffordable, and people are. What's happening now, Troy? Talk about getting back to the real estate part of it. One thing that I see, this paradigm shift that we've seen in all these industries, right, because of COVID and all that stuff. But before that was starting to happen, before the pandemic hit, and you know this because you've kind of lived this, people are moving now because of certainly real estate prices. So that's traditionally always been a reason why, right? It got too expensive. But for politics. People are leaving different states because of the politics.
Right.
And now so many different industries.
Have you ever seen that happen before?
Not really like this. I mean, we see the exodus in California.
Right.
We see the influx into Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, Arizona. People are leaving Massachusetts in droves too.
Where are they heading?
They're heading to Florida and New Hampshire. And the reason why they're going to New Hampshire is because there's no income tax. Right. And Florida has no income tax and it's warm. So
and it's close. I was just in Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, all of that stuff, and I thought, this isn't bad. When you come from Boston and you're up there and you're like, Stowe, Vermont, this is great. Portland, Maine, this is great. I want to get I
love Portland. It's a great city.
Yeah, I mean, Portland, I went on all those tours, heard about the city had burned out in 6 different times, and just I'm like, I like the Northeast. I enjoy traveling there, going to games. I mean, I love Boston. I don't know if I told you this, but my sister went to college out there.
Yeah.
She lived in Jamaica Plain.
Yep, I know Jamaica Plain.
And when I first went there, I went there and I was drinking back then. I don't drink no more. It's been 14 years. But
God bless, man.
Yeah, I took the train to the Good Will Hunting had just come out.
Oh yeah.
So I took the train to Southie.
Oh, nice. Nice just to see it, to check out Southie.
Just to see it like nothing else. That was my whole trip to Boston. And obviously walked around the whole thing because my sister's a Christian Scientist and their whole church is in that
is it?
Out of Boston. Yeah, that's the deal there.
Oh, yeah, that's right. The thing about Good Will Hunting that you mentioned that, first of all, I love the Northeast too. So if you haven't been there, the landscape and just the history is phenomenal. Vermont, I lived in Vermont for 5 years. I don't know if you knew that. And I love Vermont. It's the greenest state in the country. Sneakily, though, super high tax rate. But anyway.
Sneakily, Vermont?
Yeah, really high tax rate.
Oh, they got high tax rates in Vermont.
Yeah, in Vermont they do. New Hampshire doesn't because they don't have that income tax. But Good Will Hunting. I always say, and you went to, I love that you went to Southie to see, I want to see the real thing. That's the only
reason I was like, yeah, because I love those guys like Matt Damon and Will Ferrell. You always, just that Boston attitude, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
that was a great, I just felt like it was like a neighborhood that I wish I would have grown up in.
Well, that scene, my mom was a little bit of a Southie girl. She was Dorchester, so they call her Dot Girl. But, so that opening scene where he goes in the L Street bar and it's Ben Affleck walking in there and they're, kibitzing and bantering and all that stuff. I'm like, they didn't even have to script that. They would you could have just set up your cameras, right in that bar and just said, all right, roll them and because that's exactly how it was. It was it was just a lot of banter and a lot of close ties and where your friends became like family. And so for that reason, the Northeast is great.
So where do you see yourself as your career kind of gets in at, I guess, what's the word? Sunrise? You're in your
sunset.
Sunset of your career.
Sunset.
You're you have cases as many as you can handle. I know that.
Yeah.
You're busy as they go. Do you see yourself still in Las Vegas for the rest of your life? Do you see yourself getting other houses in California? Where are you kind of headed?
Yeah. So good question. I appreciate it. So I'm 56, Troy. I'm going to be practicing for at least a decade or more. I have young kids. So
How old are your kids?
we have 6.
Oh.
We have one at 32, and the youngest is 12. So I have a 14-year-old girl in the house and a 12-year-old boy in the house, and so we'll be raising kids forever.
Right.
But whatever, we don't care. It keeps us young. And what else?
And that's your wife, Erin, right?
My wife, Erin. Yeah. And then, so what we just did. So I say good question because we just purchased a house on Cape Cod. Within the last few years.
There you go.
We bought my mom's house.
I was
basically.
feeling like you're headed back that like I was picking it up when you were talking about it. I was like, he's gonna get a place up there. Like,
yeah, so we have it.
That's awesome.
And it's my mom's place, right? And she still lives there. So she's the caretaker. She's there now. She's taking care of it, and we go and we spend some summers there. But in the future, we'll stay out here for the majority of the time. We'll be Nevada residents forever, and then we'll go back to Massachusetts a little more.
Okay.
So.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Anything exciting coming up in terms of big legal cases? Anything that you would want to tell people who are listening to you right now about like what they should do in terms of some of your successful clients that you've seen really like do well?
Yeah. So the first thing the last thing you just mentioned would be the first thing I talk about, and that is clients who do well. We see clients who. One of the interesting things about our job is to see what industries people get into. How they succeeded in those industries. We really get good insight into how people did that. And for me, it's fascinating. Troy is one of them. Troy is absolutely right there in the top of the list about how he went about and his approach to everything and just how that's informative and inspiring, right? To have these goals and to make it happen and to be a can-do person. And, a lot of the people we see who have had success are like that. And you have to be ready for failure too, right?
Right.
So, and you got to be able to withstand that. So to get back to the core of your question, and that is, what have we seen with these clients and how they have their success? What I've seen is they handle those ups and downs well, certainly better than I would have. Like, some of these dips, and it's like water off a duck's back. It doesn't change who they are. It doesn't change their ambition. It doesn't dissuade them. They're just moving forward, and that's just sort of part of the story or the journey for them. And I admire that. And you can do that, Troy, right? Like, not everyone can do that.
Well, I think honestly, it develops. Like if you were to ask me when we first started, if that was going to be me now, I don't think it would be. I think it's through trials and tribulations that you toughen up.
Yeah.
And
you don't quit.
And if you have that mentality of like you got something to prove, or for whatever reason, for my reason it was I was a poor kid, right? And for other people's reasons it could be because you're a rich kid and you want to be richer than your dad, or it could be that you want to provide for your family, or it could be a number of reasons, but you got to find the reason to get there. And because there's going to be plenty of reasons, as you know, like physical exercise, to quit.
Yeah.
The soundtrack in your mind says quit, no matter what it is. If it's a hard hike up a mountain, if it's a hard run, if it's business, your mind says quit. There's a why. You come to the why, like with the NTA, right? And like with the Nevada Transportation Authority, the why came and it said quit. I wanted to quit, but I've trained myself that I don't quit. Yeah. And no matter what. And sometimes that's a good thing, like, with things, and sometimes it's a bad thing.
Yeah, but all right, so you have that self-awareness, so that's a good thing. And then sometimes you can rein that in. And then sometimes if you don't, and it turns into a loss, maybe you can reflect on that and say, I could have done that differently. But that's how you had your successes too, right?
Right.
So you take that good with the bad with the good. And,
you have to. You can't. You got to just sit there and you got to say, like with QuickToe, like which we should have brought you guys in the beginning, right? And we tried to call you at the end, and it was like, already invested. This is a situation I'm fighting the Nevada Transportation Authority. They don't like my towing business for whatever reason. And basically they got a blank check.
It's a little of a fiefdom,
and they can basically knock you out. You've heard about it. Normally when you hear about somebody having problems with the state, my first brain goes to what did they do?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'm
right.
thinking,
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, whatever I tell everybody, they're going to think he did something wrong. But really, I had so many things. I had like that sign company called them. We had to sign up there for years. All of a sudden, the sign inspector's coming for me. All of a sudden, animal control. We got a guard dog in there. Animal control's coming down. I'm like, I'm getting hit with every city official. And I said, at that point in time, I understood it. I said, it's not what I know. It's who I know.
Yeah.
And I don't have a phone call to make in this town right now for those types of situations. And I changed that.
That's right.
I changed that. I said, I can either continue to sit there and be that guy that doesn't have the phone call, or I'm going to go meet all the movers and shakers, give them my problem now that I'm having, see if they can help me with it. And then I'm going to realize that, towing, even though, because I'm going to encounter that problem again in another business, right? Maybe I get into the marijuana business, or maybe I get into the gaming business down the road, or some licensed business, and I'm going to have that problem again. And I'm going to realize that I better know the people first before I get into the business.
Yeah.
And so that's what I learned from that lesson. And listen, I didn't lose money on the deal. It just, I lost my pride I'm shutting down my business. I'm giving back my license because I want to have a good, what's the word? When you don't have a revocation, where you have a clean stamp on my record.
Right.
And I'm selling the business to another individual on an owner finance, so it works out good for him.
Yeah, and sometimes to me though, that's a victory. Like recognizing, okay, that is time. Like you can take that to a fault, to a really bitter end, right? If you say never, on certain things, you got to know when to say. I mean, this gets a little hokey too. Like Custer's last stand.
Yeah,
like Custer, not don't fight that hill today. Let's wait for reinforcements. He's like, no. And, it's like those type of things. You got to know, like, oh, all right, now's the time to pull back, and then here's the time to keep pressing forward and never quitting, So I look at that as a micro level thing. Like, that's a micro level. You can quit on that one, lose that battle. And then here's a mixed metaphor again. Like, on the macro level, that's the war level, right? So you can lose battles along the way, but ultimately it's to win the war. And, it has a little negative connotation with that type of metaphor. But the point is, I think you get, is like, you want to see the big picture of everything you're trying to achieve, right? And then, and if that ultimately you determine, like, hey, you know what, this isn't working out the way I wanted to. This is draining too much time, resources. I got other things to do. And we see some of these really successful people. Sometimes they get in trouble because they're stretched too thin, and their resources are going to too many different places.
Right.
And we say, geez, sometimes even like medical doctors are like, and they're in the paving business. And we're like, all right, I don't know about that one.
Dr. Asphalt.
Yeah, Dr. Asphalt, and you because then if you're not in it and you don't know it, like you were just talking about, then you're kind of relying on these experts, you're relying on others, you're not relying on yourself, and that can be tricky.
So the moral of the story is, if you're going to get into a lawsuit, get a good attorney. Before you get into a lawsuit, get a good attorney so that your corporation is set up right. And if you do get into trouble, then know when to stop fighting and know when to, and that's the situation. Like right now, as I'm talking to you, I have a situation where I was sued in Mississippi, and I'll talk about it. It's still going. I don't care if they use this as a exhibit. I know that they can pull this out and use this, but literally, we bought a property out there. I flipped it. The contractor who flipped it, we ended up adding an addition onto it. There was a septic system in the property. The contractor moved the septic system. When we were doing it, I'm like, do you know how to do these septic? Yeah, I know how to do it. Whatever. Do you know how to do additions? Yep. So we do everything by permits, codes, this whole thing. We end up selling the house. The people buy it in like December of 2016, and it was a cash offer, so it was a quick close. They waived all their inspections, and one of them was a septic inspection. So 2 weeks go by, they get in the house, and the septic starts backing up, and they go, contact me, and they contact the realtor who contacts me, and they're like, hey, our septic's backing up, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, looking through all the details. I'm like, well, they waived their septic. They waived their septic inspection, and I'm like, my contractor. I'm like, what the deal? He goes, yeah. I go, these people are saying it's backing up. Go over there, make it right. Yeah. We didn't go over and make it right. He went over there and said, I told him to do it that way, right?
Oh, geez, yeah.
And so then these people say, they go, their demand was $4,500. It's $4,500. Pay it, or we're going to sue you. And I'm like, listen, that's not fair. I didn't have a chance to correct the situation. I took a low offer, right? I took a low offer, cash close.
Because you waived.
Because I waived it.
Because they waived.
Because they waived it. And I'm like, I'll split it with you because I will acknowledge that it's partially my fault because I hired the contractor who put it in wrong. And you didn't inspect it. That's a fair. And they're like, no, that's either the deal. Fast forward, I get defaulted.
Wow.
Because listening to a bad attorney. I hired an attorney. He says, hey, his name's Skip Negrato in Mississippi. I hired an attorney. He was doing a tax situation for me, like a tax deal. I'm like, hey, I know I'm getting sued because the other guy, the realtor, got sued. How do we want to deal with this? He's like, well, in Mississippi, we have this law where unless they serve you, one of these things.
Yeah.
I was like, that sounds great.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So my mailman calls me and he says, hey, we got something. Do you want it? No. Well, that comes up as refused. They do publication. We get defaulted, which means, for those who don't know, I never get to hear my case.
Yeah.
So now I'm fighting backwards, right?
Yeah. You got to set aside the default.
Well, even from that, they agreed to not set aside the default because we're arguing in front of a judge who's a criminal attorney dealing with a default judgment. So now we got to go to appeals court. So that now we're 5 years later, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Over a $4,500 thing that could have been resolved up front.
Yeah.
Probably should have been resolved up front, but because their egos and my egos are in the way. And I've offered to settle with them for $10,000, for $20,000, for $30,000 now.
Here's the thing that you ran into, and you're bringing up a pretty good point, Troy. One thing that we experience as litigators is people who often prevail in litigation are really narcissists. Because they will be completely unreasonable. Like these, I don't know if these people you're going against in Mississippi were narcissists, but they were. Yes, but they're incredibly unreasonable. They're not going to negotiate at all. It sounds like a pretty fair offer. It's short money, right? Let's split this thing and everybody go have a happy life, and they won't do it. And so that puts you in a position of saying, you know what? Well, frig you. I'm gonna defend myself now if I get a fair shot. And then you ran into the default and service issue. But the point is, I've seen reasonable people time and time again have to concede in litigation more than they ever want to because the other side, even when they're dead to rights, even when the other side doesn't have a great case, they're sort of narcissistic. They have delusions of grandeur. They believe they have a great case. Right. Then it's our job as attorneys to work on the other attorney to say, hey, you got to disabuse your client, your narcissistic client, of the faulty notion that they have a good case because we're going to win at the end of the day, and it's going to cost you guy a lot of money. But sometimes our guy doesn't want the fight.
Well, let's talk about what they win too. Like if you let's just say plenty of clever business fellas, and if you were to invite as a clever business fellow to put their properties in different LLCs, and when you would tell that when people win and they got a judgment, how collectible are those judgments?
It's a really good question. So that's the question: is it going to be collectible, right? So you got to look down the line. I talk to clients a lot about that, just in the abstract and general. I'll say, listen, at the end of the day, we got to look at who we're going against. Do they have the money? Do they have their money hidden? Famously or infamously, O.J. Simpson has a $33 million judgment against him. The Goldman family collected $100,000 of that, and O.J.'s living a good life. So my point is, they went and prevailed in a huge way in civil court. They won a massive, massive judgment against him. And yet, here's O.J. still living a good life, and he hasn't paid that judgment off. And they've only gotten a pittance of what they won. So you got to look at that as a litigant, and we help the client with that. We say, hey, at the end of the day, we don't want you to spend a ton of money on us to get a piece of paper that's just a piece of paper that you can frame it and put it on your mantle, maybe, I don't know, but and not trying to be glib, but if it's uncollectible, so we look at that all the time, Troy. We say, is it collectible at the end of the day?
How hard is it to collect a judgment, I guess, would be my question.
So more directly to that question, it depends on who you're going against, right? And we collect judgments too. Right. So in fact, we have one now. We have a $20 million. Our client has a $29 million judgment. And we're going against that guy. Now, there was a lot of fraud, and the guy put the money overseas, and we're still chasing that guy. And the client has a ton of money to chase a judgment like that, right? You have to have a lot of money to get ripped off that much. And so you got
to have a lot of money to lose that much money,
exactly.
And then chase that much money.
And so we're chasing that one all around the world, and it's kind of fun for us. And we've had some successes here in Vegas. We grabbed the guy's Rolls Royce, and it was great because he was going out to use it, and the marshals were there taking it. You can't take my car. So that's good satisfaction for us, just little victories like that. But so it all depends on who you're going against. And I'll tell you, some of the judgments that are most collectible might be everything's relative here, folks. So if it's below six figures, it's kind of a smaller judgment. I mean, it's just tough. It's tough to go get a judgment for less than six figures because you could spend more than that in attorney's fees. And if you don't collect your attorney's fees, then you could have spent $1 to chase a buck. But if you get your attorney's fees, hallelujah, then you get twice your judgment and you can go collect it. So if you're going against somebody who's a professional and has a job, easy peasy. Then we garnish their wages, and it comes in every 2 weeks. We have a ton going on right now.
Right.
So, in speaking of real estate,
So if you're a W-2 employee and you get sued, they're going to collect.
And even if you're not a W-2 employee, if you own a business, we'll go after your stock certificates. We know how to do all of that stuff. So, like I said, we got that guy's Rolls Royce. We've done till taps. We've come in and shut down the business, and the marshals come in. They say stop. They take the money right out of the cash register.
Tell me about a story like that. That's interesting.
Awesome.
Okay,
It's
so
awesome.
like,
for me,
because if so, you know the guys, you know the backstory of the case.
Yeah, and they get ripped off, and here these people running their business, and they're not paying and not being honorable, from my perspective.
Right.
Paying their debt.
Right.
My client chase them to begin with, and then get this judgment. No, that's super satisfying. We had one just in the turn of 2021 where we went after a bank account. Now this was an individual, and it was a real estate deal too.
Right.
So we went after this. It was a real estate case. Now that I think about it, but anyways, we had a judgment of about $140,000. So we're chasing that, and we got leads, we got information through a private investigator about where this person lived, worked, and all that stuff. The first thing we do, Troy, when we get a judgment is we record it at the county recorder's office. As you know, that then hangs as a cloud over the title of the real property. You can't foreclose on those type of recordings, but it hangs there. And if they ever try to refinance or sell the house, then it's there, and the title company will say, "Let's clean this up." And we love getting those calls. We'll get those calls, and they're like. And it can be years down the road.
Yeah, it is.
7, 8 years down the road.
I've been on the other side
a ton of times, right?
Yeah, you're like, oh, credit card company. What? Yeah, and he's like, hey.
Yeah, and we say they'll come and they'll say the title company usually contacts us and they'll say, what will it take to get it off? And we'll say the full amount of that judgment and our attorney's fees going forward, which is short money, like $3,000 or $4,000. And then so we have them over a barrel, right?
At that point in time, you know you do.
We have them over a barrel. Yeah, and we know we do. We don't exploit it. We just get what's fair. We say, hey, here's what's going to cost us about $2 or $3 or $4 grand to go through this whole process with you. So we're going to take the judgment out, and that money, our fees. Our clients aren't going to pay a dime. And hallelujah. So now the client has to wait a long time for that to happen.
Right.
But we get those calls at least a couple times a year. But I got to tell you, so we just garnished this or attached this bank account where there was $60 grand in there. That's a pretty good grab.
Right.
By us, because not a lot of people keep that in their account. And so we got that. And it was a thing of beauty, Troy, because the woman called me, the judgment debtor, and she was irate, and she was like, oh, you're crazy. This is unfair. This is unbelievable. And I said, look, I've been chasing you. I've been reaching out to you. I've given you an opportunity to talk to me. You've dodged me. You've evaded me. We were going to do it in an easy way. You made me do it the hard way. And she's like, what country are we in, Russia? And I'm like, no. Because if we're in Russia, you'd be in friggin' debtor's jail. We're an American. You're lucky you're still free. But we have your money. So now what you should do is come to the table, talk to me, and maybe we'll work out a deal. Right. And we did. We worked out a deal, which she should have done long ago. Now, we won't necessarily work out a deal unless the client wants us to.
Right.
And in that case, the client wanted to. And we already got half the judgment.
This is great information. I appreciate you taking the time to come in here this afternoon and just make yourself available. You charge a lot of money. So for me, it's like the best thing in the world, to speak with an attorney. And I think for our listening audience and people, for those who are watching us, make sure you give us a 5-star review. Make sure you subscribe. And if you guys want to hear Joe Ganley come back on, definitely let us know. Joe, if they want to check in on you and they want a free attorney advice, you're not going to give that. But if they want to hire you, how are they going to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so we're at Hutchison and Steffen Law Firm here in Las Vegas. Website is Hutch Legal. And easily findable, and you can on the web.
What's your specialty? What do you like to do? What would they hire you for? I know Hutchison Steffen handles everything.
Yeah, we do. Our practice is we handle virtually everything. And for me personally, I'm a litigator, so I do mostly corporate divorces, like I talked about at the beginning. But any type of dispute where Could be breach of contract. It could be real estate deal. It could be lender liability. It could be eminent domain. We've done a ton of those cases where the government's coming in and taking your property. And so anything related to real estate. We've done one with the Septic. Believe it or not, there's Septic here.
Fighting Irish right here, right?
Yeah, Fighting Irish. Yeah. So there's Septic here in Las Vegas, too. We did a case, when you were saying that, we did a case with Septic, and it was sort of very similar to that, where it was like, permitting and all that stuff.
Right.
But so it's kind of, so we do anything where there's a dispute with anything, intellectual property. If somebody's ripping you off your trademark or your copyright or anything.
You guys do personal injury? Everybody in Vegas seems to do that.
Yeah, we do. We don't necessarily advertise that, but we do that, and we actually do quite a bit of it.
Do you?
Yeah. I don't personally, but we have a department that does.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming in, man.
All
It's
right.
been a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Troy. Really appreciate it.
Peace.